In 1957, the government of New South Wales made a prediction. They hired the Danish architect Bjørn Utzon to build an opera house in Sydney, and the plan had hard numbers attached. Finish in 1963, spend $7 million. Utzon's design was brilliant, impossible, and unsolved. The roof would not even be finished when he walked out in 1966. The building opened in 1973 at a cost of $102 million. 10 years late, roughly 15 times over budget. Now consider a smaller prediction made today in your kitchen. You have 20 minutes until your friend arrives, and you are certain you can clean the counter, sear the chicken, and shower. You have never once done this. Not in 20 minutes, not in 25. So why does your brain keep betting on a version of you that does not exist? Economists and psychologists call this the planning fallacy. The term comes from Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, who described it as the tendency to underestimate how long a task will take, even when you know perfectly well how long it took the last time. The pattern shows up everywhere. Tax returns, home renovations, dissertation chapters, airport security lines, and it is consistent. The more complex the task, the more confident the fantasy. Note what the fallacy is not. It is not laziness, and it is not stupidity, and it is not a moral failure. It is a systematic error in prediction, as reliable as a compass needle pulled slightly toward the north. Once you learn to see it, you can measure its fingerprints in your own week. The interesting question is where it comes from, and whether the mechanism can be disarmed. Kahneman later split every prediction into two views. The inside view is the one you naturally use. You look at the task, you imagine yourself doing it, and you calculate from the details of your plan. The kitchen gets cleaned in 4 minutes. The chicken takes 8. The shower takes 5. The arithmetic works, so the prediction feels solid, and that feeling is the trap. The outside view is almost never used. It asks a different question. How long did tasks like this actually take, not in your imagination, but in recorded history? The technical word for that is base rates, and your life is full of them. You have a base rate for cleaning, for cooking, for getting ready. You refuse to consult it. Why would anyone plan a future event and leave out the single most relevant body of evidence? That question is the key to the whole error. Part of the answer is that the inside view feels like planning, and the outside view feels like surrender. To ask what usually happens feels like admitting you are unremarkable. But there is a deeper problem. The mind builds the future as a story, and stories have the wrong shape for prediction. They compress. They remove errors, trips to the fridge, the phone call that eats 5 minutes, the moment you realize you have no tongs. Your imagined sequence has 3 scenes: clean, cook, shower, and it plays like a movie. A movie never shows the part where you stand in front of the open drawer, deciding. The plan is not a plan. It is a narrative, and the brain mistakes narrative coherence for predictive accuracy. That is why even warning people does not fix it. A warning adds a sentence to a story that does not want to contain it. The best evidence for how stubborn the error is comes from a 1994 study by Roger Buehler and his colleagues. They asked psychology students to predict, to the day, when they would finish their honors thesis. The average prediction was about 34 days out. The average actual finish was 48. Even students who were explicitly asked to give a realistic estimate, one that matched their actual history, still predicted dates they could not hit. The instructions did not matter. The data did not matter. These were intelligent, motivated people standing in the middle of the project, with their entire record of missed deadlines available to them in memory. They did not use it. When researchers asked about those past misses, students described them as unusual, caused by bad luck, bad timing other people. The last time was an exception. This time is the rule. That is a classic attribution bias. We blame our own lateness on weather and traffic. We explain other people's lateness as a character flaw. But the planning fallacy is not just self-serving. It runs deeper than reputation management because it happens in private, on tasks with no audience at all. Kahneman's cleaner explanation is this. When you think about your plan, you cannot help but think about the normal course of events, the version of the future where everything works. The distribution of possible outcomes is invisible. You think you are predicting the average case. You are actually predicting the best case, and you do it because imagination can only render one timeline at a time. Optimism is not a choice here. It is a side effect of the way the brain projects the future. The engine runs on stories, and stories always resolve. The same error scales up, grotesquely. Bent Flyvjerg spent decades studying large infrastructure projects and found that 9 out of 10 of them go over budget. The Sydney Opera House was not an outlier. It was the rule, displayed on a larger screen. The Scottish Parliament building finished at roughly 10 times its original estimate. Boston's Big Dig went from under $3 billion to nearly 15. Each of these had engineers, accountants, and decades of data. Each one still built its future as a single clean story. Here is the strange part. The error gets worse, not better, as stakes rise. A bigger project does not produce a more careful estimate. It produces a more elaborate fantasy because the amount of narrative detail grows faster than the amount of humility. More planning can feed the delusion. More data, used honestly, is the only cure. Now the useful question. Is there any condition where the fallacy shrinks? Yes. Routine tasks have almost no planning fallacy. You can estimate your drive to work within a minute or two because you have done it hundreds of times and received immediate feedback every morning without fail. The bias lives in the gap between repetition and novelty. The less familiar the task, the more your mind defaults to the reassuring story. That suggests a fix and also its limit. Experience is the natural cure, but it only works for the exact same task, repeated. Experience with cooking does not help you predict a kitchen remodel. The base rate only exists in cases where you were paying attention. And in the chaotic middle of a new project, you usually were not. You would think the loop would correct itself. Every missed deadline is a data point, and the data is unambiguous. But memory does not store duration faithfully. Once the task is over, the discomfort fades, and what remains is a compressed summary of the accomplishment. Researchers call this rosy retrospection. You remember the shower as refreshing, the meal as worth it, and the frantic sprint to the door gets filed away as a funny story. So the base rate you refuse to consult is often not even available to you. Your memory of the last time is already a narrative, edited by the same machinery that built the prediction in the first place. That is why the error feels incurable. You are not learning from experience. You are learning from a polished version of experience that confirms your optimism. The second limit is stranger than memory. People with mild depression predict task durations more accurately than non-depressed people. The finding comes from research on depressive realism, the idea that depressed individuals see certain parts of the world with less distortion because they do not coat the future in an optimistic narrative. The interpretation is debated, but the timing result has been replicated often enough that it stands. They do not render the flawless version of the event, so their estimates land closer to the truth. This is not a recommendation. Depression is not a planning tool, but it is a clue. The planning fallacy is powered by the warm, forward-looking story. Interrupt the story and the prediction improves. That is exactly what two practical techniques do, and both are simple enough to use tonight. The first is the Premortem. Imagine it is 1 hour later. Your friend is at the door, the chicken is raw, and you have to explain what happened. Then work backward and write the reasons. I forgot the shower. I undercounted the dishes. The phone rang. Listing those reasons before you start converts the single clean story into a set of failure branches. It forces the inside view to notice the outside one. The second fix is reference class forecasting, and it requires no imagination at all. Write down the last 3 times you did something similar. Average them. Add a buffer on top. For an unfamiliar task, double your gut estimate. The final number will feel insulting, bloated, wrong. That feeling is the real data, the exact distance between your narrator and your record. Why do these methods feel so unnatural? Because your brain hates waste. A buffer feels like an admission of failure. The cautious plan feels like a betrayal of your capable future self. But look at the actual trade. The planning fallacy does not just make you late. It makes you resent your own past self for failing at an impossible schedule. It manufactures guilt where there was only bad arithmetic. It adds stress hormones to a task that was already hard, because you are always racing a clock that was never real. Once you accept the error, something interesting happens. The buffer stops feeling like failure and starts feeling like freedom. You are not abandoning the version of you who can do anything. You are finally making a schedule for the version who actually exists. That version is the only one who has to live with the outcome. There is one more layer worth seeing. Correcting for the planning fallacy does not mean inflating every estimate forever. It means changing what you claim to know. When you say you will be there in 5 minutes, you are making a promise your brain has already filed under fiction. The honest move is to say the number you believe, or to say you cannot predict that well. People do not mind the longer estimate as a rule. They mind the surprise, the waiting, the silent extension of the clock. When was the last time you were annoyed at a friend for arriving exactly on time? Never. Annoyance lives in the gap between promise and reality, not in the size of the promise. The planning fallacy is a social contract violation committed by your own imagination, and everyone around you has already learned to discount you. They know. You are the only one running the optimistic simulation. So revisit the kitchen, but this time with the outside view. Your base rate for cleaning, cooking, and showering inside 20 minutes is 0. That is the distribution. That is the record. The honest prediction, using only the data you have, is that your friend arrives to a half-clean counter or damp hair or a chicken that is still pink, which means the real fix is not scrubbing faster. It is adjusting the plan to the prediction. Choose one task instead of 3. Tell your friend a later time. Or accept the kitchen and shorten the shower. Each of those is a negotiation between the planner and the odds. And here is the payoff the fallacy has been hiding from you. Accurate predictions are more motivating, not less. You can actually meet an honest deadline. You cannot ever meet a fantasy. The version of you that does everything in 20 minutes is not an enemy. It is the reason you start at all. The energy to begin any task comes from that confident projection. But it is a projector, not a source of information. The planning fallacy is the tax you pay when you mistake the projection for the record. Your friend arrives in 20 minutes. The kitchen is still dirty, or the chicken is half-cooked, and in that instant you will know exactly what you have always known. The prediction was never about the task. It was about the version of you who could not lose. You are not that version. You never were. And that is fine because the version you are, the one with the real base rate, is the only one who actually gets things done. Bet on her instead.